Between 1950 and 1969, Minneapolis experienced major changes. The population of the city reached more than 500,000 in 1950, but declined as its suburbs grew rapidly. This suburbanization brought housing, shopping centers, and schools. In addition, urban renewal transformed the city, demolishing many historic buildings. Let's dive into some key events that shaped Minneapolis during this era.
Minneapolis and St. Paul, twin cities of Minnesota, are the gateways to vacation lands in the north.
Southdale Mall, located in the Minneapolis suburb of Edina, was the first indoor shopping mall in the United States. Opened on October 8, 1956, the idea was to create a place where people could shop comfortably, even in Minnesota's cold winter weather.
We're in suburban Minneapolis at the Garden Court of the Southdale Regional Shopping Center. The court is surrounded by shops on 2 levels, connected by escalators, and easily reached by means of interior streets, also covered and lined by still more stores. A sidewalk cafe is one of 8 dining facilities available to shoppers who have their choice of Dayton's or Donaldson's department stores and 70 smaller stores and specialty shops. Concentrated under one roof, they're only a few seconds apart, competing for customers as usual, but finding that being neighbors helps create new business for all.
With a skating rink, 21-foot bird cage, and water fountain, Southdale wasn't just a shopping center, it was a community hub. Its success inspired the creation of many other malls across the country. Isidore Blumenfeld, known as Kid Can, was a notorious Minneapolis crime figure, akin to Al Capone in Chicago. Active from Prohibition through the 1950s, he thrived in bootlegging, gambling, and labor racketeering. In 1936, Kid Can was tried for taking the life of journalist Walter Liggett. Liggett's wife identified Can as the culprit, but Can provided an alibi, leading the jury to find him not guilty. Despite numerous investigations and lives lost, he avoided serious prison time until late in life, ultimately retiring wealthy in Florida before passing away in Minneapolis in 1981. Kid Can was rumored to have lived in a castle-like house in Golden Valley, Minnesota, known locally as the Castle. On March 7, 1950, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 307, a Martin 202, was approaching Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport when it collided with a flagpole. The plane, struggling in poor weather, lost part of its wing and crashed into the Doughty family's house in Minneapolis. Tragically, all 3 crew members and 10 passengers aboard lost their lives, along with 2 children and their dog in the house. In 1956, a 21-year-old Elvis Presley performed 2 shows in the Twin Cities. Despite being a rising star, only about 6,000 fans attended the Minneapolis Auditorium show due to the rainy weather and the fact that it was Mother's Day. Those who came, however, witnessed the early magic of the future king of rock and roll. The Rolling Stones made a stop at Excelsior Amusement Park in 1964 during their first American tour. At that time, the band members were not yet superstars, and they played to a small crowd of fewer than 300 people. Despite the low turnout, this concert has become legendary due to a local encounter that may have inspired their later hit, You Can't Always Get What You Want. According to a legend, a man named Mr. Jimmy Hutmaker, a well-known local figure, met Mick Jagger while they both stood in line in a local store, and his name was later mentioned in the song. In 1965, the Beatles made their way to Minnesota, performing at the Metropolitan Stadium in the Minneapolis suburb of Bloomington. Their concert, part of their second U.S. tour, was met with high excitement from fans, but the crowd was smaller than expected due to concerns over chaos. This was the only time the Beatles performed in Minnesota, as they retired from touring the following year. Today, Mall of America stands where the old Metropolitan Stadium once was, and Nickelodeon Universe now sits where the Beatles performed. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Bob Dylan, then known as Robert Zimmerman, moved to Minneapolis and enrolled at the University of Minnesota. There, he shifted his focus from rock and roll to folk music, drawn to its deeper meaning and emotional impact. Dylan began performing at a local coffee house and got involved in the folk music scene. It was during this time that he started calling himself Bob Dylan, a name inspired by the poet Dylan Thomas. 1958 saw the birth of Prince Rogers Nelson, better known as Prince, at Mount Sinai Hospital in Minneapolis. His parents were musicians, and Prince was named after his father's stage name, Prince Rogers. He started playing music early, writing his first song, Funk Machine, at age 7 on his father's piano. He attended Bryant Junior High, where his passion for playing instruments began to show. Later, he went to Minneapolis Central High School, where he developed his iconic style. Later in life, Prince created Paisley Park, a massive studio outside Minneapolis where he both lived and worked. Today, it is a museum. He also had a deep connection to First Avenue, a Minneapolis venue he would transform into a legendary performance space. The nightclub has launched the careers of numerous artists, such as Soul Asylum, The Replacements, Husker Du, Semisonic, and Lizzo. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Minneapolis Lakers dominated basketball, winning 5 championships in the early 50s before moving to Los Angeles in 1960. Baseball fans cheered for the Minneapolis Millers, a minor league team that produced stars like Willie Mays. They played their home games at Nicollet Park until 1955, with the ballpark being torn down the next year. The Millers played until 1960 when the Minnesota Twins, an MLB team, took over in 1961. The Twins quickly became a hit, winning the American League pennant in 1965. Football entered the scene in 1961 with the Minnesota Vikings. Named after the region's Scandinavian heritage, the Vikings quickly became a beloved team. Hockey fans celebrated when the Minnesota North Stars joined the NHL in 1967, marking the start of professional hockey in the Twin Cities. The North Stars played home games at the Met Center in Bloomington. After the 1992-93 season, they moved to Dallas and became the Dallas Stars. The Foshay Tower dominated the Minneapolis skyline during the 1950s and 1960s. In fact, it was the tallest building in Minneapolis from 1929 until 1973. Inspired by the Washington Monument, this Art Deco skyscraper stands 447 feet tall, and its antenna reaches 607 feet. Wilbur Foshay, who built the tower, was a successful businessman who fell into trouble. Shortly after the tower's grand opening, his business empire collapsed during the Great Depression, leading to his arrest for fraud. Foshay served 3 years in prison, and his story became a dramatic part of local history. Today, the tower is a historic hotel, still standing as a symbol of its era. The Metropolitan Building in Minneapolis was a stunning example of 19th century architecture, known for its tall, elegant design and beautiful materials. Completed in 1890, it was the city's first skyscraper and a centerpiece of its downtown. However, in 1961, the building was demolished as part of a major urban renewal project. The building's destruction was a major loss for Minneapolis, sparking a movement to protect other historic landmarks. In the late 1960s, Hollywood filmed the disaster movie Airport at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, starring Dean Martin. They chose MSP for its snowy, modern look to represent a busy Chicago airport. In the 1950s and 1960s, Block E, located on Hennepin Avenue between 6th and 7th Streets in Minneapolis, was a vibrant and varied area. It featured a mix of businesses including arcades, ice cream stores, and bars. The block also housed theaters and restaurants, attracting both locals and visitors. As downtown underwent changes, Block E's reputation shifted, and by the late 1970s, it began to be known for its seedier establishments and a decline in its overall condition. The Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota was a key cultural center for African Americans in the Twin Cities during the 20th century. However, the construction of Interstate 94 between 1956 and 1968 destroyed much of Rondo, displacing hundreds of families and businesses. This loss not only weakened the African American community in St. Paul, but also had a significant impact on Minneapolis, disrupting social and economic connections and making it harder for the African American community to thrive in both cities. In the 1950s, Charles Schulz lived in Minneapolis while creating his famous comic strip Peanuts, which featured the beloved characters Charlie Brown and Snoopy. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. If you like this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe for more videos like this, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Before you go, make sure to check out these 2 fascinating videos. Thanks for watching the History Stop, and we'll see you next time.